From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Is there trouble in paradise? The relationship between leadership in the Rhode Island House and Senate chambers seems strained as of late. Is it really just about the controversial Paw Sox proposal, or is it something deeper? And what's the outlook on Smith Hill for Governor Gina Raimondo's newly unveiled budget plan? Our guest this week on Newsmakers, Senate President Dominick Ruggerio. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the program from WPRI.com, reporter Ted Nesi. Senate President Dominick Ruggerio, welcome back to the program. Really good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Ted and I, before every show we go, all right, what are we starting with? What's the first question we want to ask the Senate President? And we decided to just get this out of the way first, and that is the Paw Sox proposal. I got to tell you, as a reporter, there's a lot of fatigue on this subject. I'm guessing as a lawmaker, there's probably a lot of fatigue on the topic as well. So I'm just going to ask you, is there anything new? What's the latest on this? What can we tell the people that they need to know right now?
Well, obviously, we passed the legislation, and it's sitting in the House right now, and I'm hoping that maybe the Speaker will take this up. I know he said he wasn't going to take this up at one time. I know there's been some pressure from some of the members of his chamber, and I think it's a very important issue to address. I mean, they've been a great community citizen for a lot of years, and I think it's just a great proposal that the Senate had spent about 30 hours in hearings. They've crafted a piece of legislation that I think is acceptable not only to the state, but also to the league and to the city of Pawtucket and to the ball club. I just think it's a great proposal. I'm hoping that the House entertains our proposal and uses that as a takeoff to consider whatever they're thinking of right now.
The House Speaker has suggested that the team needs to pony up more for it to be more palatable for the public and to him. Do you think there's any appetite on the part of team owners to do that?
Well, the Senate proposal has increased their contributions substantially, I think to the tune of $9 million. I have no objection to the House taking a good look at the legislation and see what else they can provide as far as relief for the city, relief for the state, and as far as the owner's contribution to increase that. So, I mean, I think they could possibly sit there and take a look at it and come up with a better proposal. We certainly don't have a monopoly on good ideas, and I'm hoping that the House at least hears the legislation and considers the legislation in the context that the Senate has sent it over.
Pete, as Tim mentioned at the top of the show, big topic of conversation in the State House, and you know it, this year is the relationship between you and Speaker Mattiello, as well as more broadly between the House and the Senate. One person up there who knows the building pretty well recently told me it's as bad as they've ever seen. Why do you think it's gotten to this point? Why do you think there's such tension between the two chambers in the last year or so?
First of all, I think it's kind of overblown. I've said this before.
Reporters never overblow stories, Senate President.
Not
you know
in Rhode Island.
Never, never, never.
But I've said this before. I have great respect for the Speaker. I appreciate what he does. He has a tough job. He has to deal with 74 other people. He and I have the same ideas on a lot of matters, and we have different ideas on some matters. And obviously, I think some of the situation has emanated from what transpired last year with the budget, but I'm looking to work with the Speaker. We've met a couple times recently, and I think we can have a very, very good relationship. We had a great relationship before when he was Majority Leader and I was Majority Leader. So I feel that we all have to work together, the Speaker, myself, and the Governor, and our respective chambers. And I think we can get to the finish line if we cooperate. So I'm looking to have a good relationship with the Speaker.
Well, let's use his words when you say that you think it's being overblown. He told the Journal the real issue is the Senate is being retaliatory because they don't approve of the House's position on the Paw Sox Stadium. The House will honor the will of the people and will not be bullied or threatened by the Senate. We might be overblowing it, but that he's not taking. Those aren't kid gloves there.
This situation had absolutely nothing to do with the Pawtucket Red Sox. This has to do with whether the Senate can control their own budget, can fill the vacancies as needed. We have a whole bunch of vacancies there. We can't operate without our staff. I mean, this was the crux of the problem initially this year.
Yeah, that. So the quote Tim mentioned, that was when you sent a letter to the Speaker complaining, protesting that the JCLS, which is kind of what controls the budget in the General Assembly, was not moving fast enough on on Senate hiring, that he was holding things up. He sent that letter. There was some talk of even a potential lawsuit. Where does that dispute stand today over control of JCLS? I mean, the Senate's wanted equal power on JCLS forever. It hasn't happened. But where does that dispute stand that led to that letter?
Well, obviously, we're an equal branch with the House as far as our legislative branch. We have to vote on the budget. We feel that we should be a player in the game when it comes to some of the proposals that we put in the budget. We don't feel that we should be a rubber stamp. So I think, especially with the involvement of many of my colleagues who sit on the Senate Finance Committee, these people have been there for a lot of years. They have a great deal of expertise and experience and institutional knowledge. So I think that we should be considered an equal partner, an equal branch of government with the House, and I think we should have all the amenities that the House has. And we operate relatively lean in the Senate. I did an assessment of staff this year, and I just think we need more people. We're not requesting additional bodies at this point in time. All we're looking for is to fill the vacancies that we had from people who have left to go to other areas of government and into the private sector.
So now that he authorized a couple of the hires that have been held up, is that dispute died down that led to that letter that got some big headlines about a month ago?
Well, obviously, it's a good faith effort on both our parts. I'm just looking to get my staff at full strength. This is a very important time, as you know, in the legislature, because this is when we are formulating all our ideas and our legislative package. So we certainly need the personnel over there to assist our senators with that duty, and we can't operate the way we've been operating for the past couple months at this point in time.
What about looking forward more fundamentally to the JCLS? And again, so our viewers understand that's the administrative arm of the State House, hiring and firing of workers there. It is run by Mattiello ally Frank Montanaro Jr. Moving forward and looking down the road, do you believe that something needs to be done to allow the Senate to independently hire and manage staff, to have more of a say with the JCLS, more seats at the table?
Well, I'm not really concerned about running the House. I have enough of a job of running the Senate. But I think that we should be allowed to fill our vacancies as needed, and I think we should have our own budget.
So what would that look like then with the JCLS if you wanted to have more power there?
I'm not really looking for more power. I'm just looking for equal power. I just feel that we should have our own budget. We can work within the confines of our own budget, and I just think it's better that way, because then we'll be responsible for it. If anyone comes to us, someone like you, and says, what's happening with this part of your budget, what's happening in that part, at least I have an answer. I don't have an answer as to what's going on right now in JCLS.
You mentioned, or the Senate mentioned, some concern about the hiring of the lawyers, the part-time lawyers who are coming into the General Assembly and the Legislative Council. How much involvement does the Senate have in those staffing choices right now?
Nominal.
Okay, so that is coming entirely from the House for the most part.
Yes, I would say so. The composition of the of a legislative council where all the bills are drafted, most of those hires have come from the House. All
right, now that we've bored the viewers to tears with some internal battles, let's turn to the budget.
Yes.
I want to ask you, you're a big supporter, Senate President, of the allowing sports betting in Rhode Island. That is in the governor's budget. She wants it too, and it seems to have some support, but you're all waiting on this U.S. Supreme Court case that they've heard but might not be decided for a few more months. The number one pushback you hear is it's not responsible to have the governor have her budget balanced based on $23-ish million that we can only get in Rhode Island if that Supreme Court case goes the way the state wants. What do you say to that criticism, that she shouldn't have assumed that money will be there when you don't know yet how the case will go?
Well, first of all, most of the people that I've spoken with, and I was away at a conference about a month ago, and this was one of the topics of that conference, and it was very well done. They had lawyers from all over the place, the NCAA, Major League Baseball, the NBA, and these people, and I look at them as experts. I am not an attorney. I look at them as experts in their field. They all concluded that they feel that the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, will overturn what they did previously and allow the states to Obviously, I'm putting the legislation in conditional upon a favorable Supreme Court decision, so we'll see what happens. I really want to get out in front of the issue because I think it's a good issue. It'll produce revenue immediately because we can have sports betting at our existing gaming facilities right now without having to go through a referendum. So I think we have a substantial advantage over Massachusetts that's building casinos right now. So I just think it's time for us to get in the game, and I think it will be a tremendous revenue generator. I think the $23 million that the governor has put in his budget is a very conservative estimate.
You think it could generate more money than that?
I think it'll generate a substantial amount of money.
So as you point out, that if sports betting, if the High Court allows it, and then Rhode Island passes it, you'd have to do the sports betting in person at, say, Twin River, is how that would work. There's a lot of talk that sports betting could lead to online betting. That, the understanding is that would take a referendum. There would have to be a constitutional change. But do you support the idea of online betting in Rhode Island?
Yes, I do, because I mean it's all over the place. There's offshore betting. There's a whole bunch of games that can be bet on, and not necessarily in this country. You could, as I said, online sports betting in other countries. So I think it's something that we should really look into, because I'm certain that we're losing a ton of revenue. 97% of the money bet on last year's Super Bowl was bet illegally. So I think that's a telling figure.
So it's happening anyway. Why not regulate it and legalize it? Do you worry about the social impact of expanding legalized gambling?
Well, we always worry about the social impact of something like that, whether it's alcohol or drugs, and anything of that nature. But we do worry about it. We have programs that are in place for people who have gaming issues, that they can get treatment for that. So I would have to leave that up to the vendors and the lottery to look over that as far as how to treat problem gamblers.
What when you talk to senators and the other Democratic leadership members, talk to the Senate rank and file, what are the biggest concerns you've heard about the budget so far? What issues are on the minds of senators? What are they bringing up to you and the other leadership team?
Well, in the budget, there's $70 million in Medicaid cuts. We're looking at that closely. We certainly don't want to affect anyone who needs those particular programs. There's a number of other things. I mean, I'm concerned about the collective bargaining agreements, and they have to be paid out.
Right now,
which are expired right now. I mean, there's a lot of concerns that we're looking at in the budget right now, but it's very preliminary at this point in time. I know the Senate Finance Committee is going to jump into all these issues in the very near future. They're starting to have their hearings now, so we're going to take a look and see what the governor's proposal and how it's going to impact the public.
Before we go to a break, I have a broader question on the budget. Every year, it's budget deficit, budget deficit, budget deficit, and you all work to try and close those gaps. And we're in really good economic times right now, and yet we're still grappling with budget deficits. How does the state change that? I mean, we're looking at broad-based tax increases, cutting social services. How do you see looking down the road, make it so it's not Groundhog's Day, if you will?
Well, I think both the Speaker, myself, and even the Governor will agree that we're not looking to raise any broad-based taxes. We don't want to go backwards. We want to stay competitive. I think we've done a tremendous amount of tax cuts in recent years, and the problem that we're facing right now is we don't have the revenue to replace those tax cuts. I think sports gaming will generate that revenue. I am looking to generate revenue, and I know my colleagues in the Senate are looking to generate additional revenue and see how it goes to address the expenses that we have. The problem is, I mean, we have a built-in deficit, and until we address that, we're going to keep having these problems. So we have to address the structural deficit going forward.
All right, we're going to take a break here on Newsmakers. When we come back, we have a lot more to talk about with our guests, including the line item veto. Senate President Dominick Ruggerio joins us when we come back on Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my left, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Our guest this week is Senate President Dominick Ruggerio. Mr. President, the line item veto. There's a study commission with members of the House and Senate that has been formed. The Senate is clearly for the line item veto. It got a very robust reaction during the State of the State, the Governor's State of the State, when she brought it up. Can you see the bill coming to the Senate floor before the commission is done? I
don't see that. Normally we wait for the commission to come back with their report. There are various forms of line item veto that have been used across the country. We want to take a look at some of those. It's a joint committee between the House and the Senate, and they're going to take a close look at it. They just met this week. They had I think it was this week, they had an organizational meeting. So I think they're going to go forward and they're going to move relatively rapidly. But I think that there's so many forms that we've requested to take a look at, to get copies of. So we're going to kind of have the commission take a good look at it and see what they recommend.
Did this come up over at dinner with you and the Speaker?
No.
You didn't want to ruin the dinner?
No.
Give a minute. You don't want to give the House indigestion. Looking at the jumping up in excitement I saw at State of the State for line item, every senator is either a sponsor of the bill or on the record supporting line item veto at this point. Can we say it's fairly likely at this point some line item veto is likely to win the support of the Senate this session?
I envision that some form of line item veto will be passed and to be put on the ballot, because you know that requires a constitutional change. So we're going to wait and see what happens. We're going to wait and see what comes out of the commission. Like I said, it's a joint commission, so they have to agree on the report itself. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what their findings are going to be.
I want to ask you about a different commission, the 195 Commission. You expressed concern to my colleague Kim Kalunian a couple months ago when she did a story on the 195 Commission about the pace of their work, that they maybe were going too slowly. Since then, there's been some changes of leadership. They've been moving on some things. I just am curious where you're at now with how you feel about the work the Commission is doing a few months after you expressed those concerns.
Well, I was a little disappointed because it seemed like things were dragging over a period of time, and I was hoping that we got into the development stage and we'd have a lot more developers and companies looking to come here to locate. I think things are starting to happen. If you look what's happening down in the city, you got Wexford there in that area now. You got hotels being proposed. You got a lot of developers coming in that are expressing an interest because they see what's happening in Providence. Please keep in mind we have other developable land in the state too, in East Providence, and we're going to have some in Newport. So I think Rhode Island is really ripe for development. I think this is the time for us to look to attract not only developers, but some of these companies that are looking for a place in close proximity to New York and Boston. I think we have a great opportunity to bring a business in here and thus increase our jobs and bring additional people into the state.
Another dust-up involving 195 where you had concerns was over this the high-rise tower proposal. It's gotten a lot of attention. They moved ahead this week. There's a lot of steps left, but they moved ahead with, I think it's now one tower, Jason Fain, the New York developer. What are you thinking about that project now? I know you had conversations with him and were intrigued by it.
First of all, when he came into Rhode Island, I thought it was a great project. If we're looking to bring these companies in, if we're looking to bring GE in, if we're looking to bring the Wexfords of the world in, Johnson & Johnson, where are these people going to live? And these are high-end people, most of them that earn, an excellent salary. So they have to live somewhere. And I don't see anyone coming in and doing a project like that on speculation. I mean, I just think it's too big, so I would have to assume that he has some kind of marketing plan where he feels he can market those condos. That's not my bailiwick. I'm not one to tell him, no, you can't do it, you can do it. I just think that when someone comes in here with $500 million in his pocket, I want to be the last one to turn him away.
State Senator Nick Kettle is under investigation by the state police, as you know. His lawyer told me it appears to be an investigation into video voyeurism. Even if his conduct doesn't rise to criminality, the Senate has the power to sanction or censure him. Have you considered that?
I think you have to be very careful how you address a situation like that when it's an elected official. The people elect the person. It's kind of like a cloudy situation as to how you remove someone. I don't know what's happening with Mr. Kettle's with Senator Kettle's situation.
Have you talked to him at all?
I have not had a conversation with him. No, I have not.
Okay. I want to ask you about the contract continuation bill.
Yes.
House and Senate passed it last year, and this would allow municipal union contracts to continue on even when they expire while negotiations are happening. The governor vetoed it. Is the Senate going to give it another go?
I'm not sure what's going to happen now. I'm sure it'll be submitted. We'll go through the hearing process. We'll take a look at it. I'm not sure what's going to happen with that piece of legislation, especially in light of the fact that the governor vetoed it. So,
what about there might be a renewed push for binding arbitration for teachers?
I haven't heard that at this point in time, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was submitted.
Do you support it?
I supported it last time because I think it's very effective in bringing the parties to the table.
I want to ask you about hospitals. I actually had a story just last night. I sat down with the president of Brown University and the CEO of Kerr New England, who have very different views on what should happen to the Kerr New England hospitals. As you know, Kerr New England's looking to merge with Partners in Boston. Brown's now got its own proposal. Maybe Brown works with a different company, Prospect, to take it over. The crux of it is Brown's president says she thinks it would be bad for Rhode Island if our second biggest hospital system is controlled by a Boston entity. Do you have any concerns about that? What's your thinking right now?
I mean, this situation is relatively new as far as the new players in the game with Brown University. I haven't really had a chance to evaluate the situation. We're still taking a look at it. This particular situation, the legislature really has no involvement in it at this point in time. I mean, it will be addressed maybe under the Hospital Conversion Act, but that's later on down the road, I believe.
So hands off for now on this, from your perspective.
It's a wait-and-see approach right now, yes.
You support the governor's push to rebuild, fix the state's public schools. If the House, as they work through it, shrunk the governor's school infrastructure bond proposal, would you be okay with that? Would you consider that? Or are you set on the original amount of $250 million?
I think anywhere from $200 to $250 million is a great price. Is a great that would be a great project. I would be amenable to supporting that.
Is there a basement for you if they cut it in half? Say, would you have an issue with that?
I'd have to consider what they would be looking to do with that. These schools are in deplorable shape. Most of them are over 6 decades old, and I'll speak from experience. The elementary school I went to, they just tore it down. I don't know if there was any relationship between that and me, but they just tore it down. North Providence is doing 2 new schools, and that's what I think you're going to see with a lot of these other schools. I mean, it's difficult for these kids to go to school, and they have an atmosphere where the paint's peeling off the wall, and the plaster's falling, and the leaky roof. It's just a terrible conditions, and I just think it doesn't help them in that learning aspect.
The House Republican leader, Patricia Morgan, has said on the show a couple weeks ago, her idea to make those projects cheaper is to remove the prevailing wage law rules around those schools, so that you don't have to pay the higher wage that prevailing wage sometimes requires. I have little doubt you would oppose that. You're a strong supporter of organized labor. What's your reaction? She says it could save taxpayers a lot of money. Well,
it depends on how you're saving money. You might get people that are not experienced that might win bids because of the lower rates. You normally have a lot of problems with that particular aspect, and you see those in the right-to-work states. I just think when you lower wages, you don't help the economy.
2018 is an election year. I assume you are running again?
I will be running for re-election, yes.
How long do you see yourself in the position as Senate President?
I've always said that those positions don't have a long shelf life, so I would like to run for Senate President again if I get reelected, and we'll see where it goes from there.
What's been the biggest? You've been in the General Assembly since before I was born, I think, actually. Senate President.
You're welcome. I've been in the General Assembly before most people.
Yeah, right, yeah, exactly. So you know the legislature very well. So this is kind of a different question for you. But you've been Senate President for almost a year now. Was there any surprise about the difference between being the number 2 as you've been for a number of years, or a rank and file but influential senator, and being in the top job?
Oh yeah.
Like what comes to mind? Yeah, what comes to mind?
Obviously, I had a great Senate President, and both Joe Montalbano and Teresa Piperweed, they were absolutely fabulous. But there is a huge time commitment for this particular job, and I had a great job that I left when I took this job in June. I retired from my organization, I mean, I just could not figure out how I would do both jobs. So I felt that something had to give in this particular situation, but. There's something happening every day. As you know, you're dealing with 37 other people. Sometimes that can be challenging, and but when I look at it, when I step back and take a look at it, I work with great senators. I mean, these people are really knowledgeable. They know the issues. They've been dealing with the issues for years. We don't have that transition type situation where people come and go. So I rely heavily on those senators and their level of expertise.
So on paper, your job is part-time for half the year. It doesn't sound like it's actually that way when you count the hours in your day.
Let me just say this: it's the fullest part-time job I ever had.
Is this something you and the Speaker commiserated about? I mean, managing personalities, and he's got a few more personalities to manage in his chamber. But do you talk about that with him?
Once in a while we talk about not necessarily individuals, but people as a group, as to how his group is looking at one thing, and some of my people on the opposite side that have like views are looking at it. So we commiserate once in a while on individuals, individual groups, but not necessarily on individuals.
Quick question. There was talk that you might consider former Republican Senator John Pagliarini as the new Senate parliamentarian. Have you made a decision on that?
I guess I have. I hired John. He came in and filled out his paperwork today.
You don't mind a Republican in that job?
I don't mind a Republican in that job. No, I have a good I developed a very good relationship with John. I mean, he was there for a short period of time, but we had a very good relationship. And I respect people who can do the job. And John's a Republican, and that's all right as far as I'm concerned. But I think he'll do a phenomenal job, and that's what I look for.
30 seconds left. Most people are watching this on a Sunday morning. Where are you going to be watching the game?
I don't know. I have a couple options that I haven't decided yet. Usually I like to stay home and watch it myself and scream at the television if things aren't going right. So I haven't decided at this point.
Do you have a prediction?
I believe the Patriots are going to win.
All right. I hope you're right on that one.
We've never had someone pick against them.
Yeah, I know.
The Super Bowl newsmakers, yeah.
Senate President Dominick Ruggerio, thank you very much for joining us. If you missed any of it, it's online, WPRI.com. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.